things in that. So thanks. So Marilyn said them in Pali and Sarah said them in English. So Dana, generosity, Sila, morality, and Nekama, simplicity. Beautiful. And I was tasked with talking about generosity and morality, and I just talked about generosity. So I'm just going to touch in morality. It's so important, but we're glossing over it. But I think we're quite moral people. Anyway, so, but always room for growth for all of us in all of these paramis. So morality, you know, as far as the Buddha's teachings go, is the 5 precepts, these ethics, these guiding principles in our life that we undertake. It's beautiful how it's worded. We undertake the training to refrain from killing, from taking a life. And number 2, that we refrain from taking that which is not given. So, you know, killing, stealing. And number 3, that number 3 is, it's in the sexual arena of our lives, our sexual energy, but we're actually applying the principle of 1 and 2. You know, we're not taking what's not given. I think even with our eyes, you know, taking from other people's bodies, and we're not harming. So we're very careful with our sexual energy. We understand it's a very powerful human drive and energy and force in our lives, and that we're taking great care around that energy, that we're not harming and we're not taking. And then the 4th precept, that we're refraining from false speech. That is the precept. That as much as possible, we're clean and honest in what we share and what we talk about. And I know in my life, this is still something that just, you know, a few weeks ago I was talking, and I exaggerate a lot. I mean, it's very, very strong. And it has to do with my own insecurities and desire to make an impression or be funny, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I just make it a habit after I exaggerate to go back to that person and say, that was an exaggeration. And that's helped me to not do it so often, because it's time consuming, and it's also embarrassing. And the 5th precept, that we're not going to partake in intoxicants that dull the mind and lead to us then being careless and breaking the other 4 precepts. So that's the morality in the Buddhist teachings. And just to super encourage us, there's 2 passages for me that really are powerful and inspiring about following the ethics that the Buddha is laying out. And they really fit into the whole framework of not harming oneself and not harming other, you know, which is really where the Buddha started with his own journey. Like, how am I going to do that? How am I going to not harm myself and not harm other? And in the gradual training that Sanghamitra has talked about a lot, when it comes to this aspect of the training, where, you know, the generosity and the morality, when this is a direct quote from Majjhima Nikaya 51, verse 15, possessing this aggregate of noble virtue, you know, this collection of following these precepts, this collection of noble virtue, one experiences within oneself a bliss that's blameless. It's a bliss that's blameless. It's a joy, it's a contentment, it's an ease that's not, it's the opposite of costing anybody or oneself. It's just blameless, priceless. You can't buy it, but you can do it. And then So, this is the non-harming of oneself. And then this really fabulous sutta, fabulous passage in Anguttara 8. And it says it 5 times, but I'm just going to talk about verse 39. If you go, sorry, it's the book of eights, it's the Sutta 39. And it says it 5 times, that when we undertake the first precept and keep it, when we to the best, when we're under that training for the second, training for the third, training for the fourth, training with the fifth. What we do is we give the gift of fearlessness to other people. When I'm living an ethical life, I'm taking care of my own heart, I'm taking care of my own conscience, I'm taking care of my psyche, but I'm also giving a gift of fearlessness to others. That they don't need to fear me. I'm not going to abuse them. I'm not going to take advantage of them. I'm not going to, to the best of my ability, I'm not going to hurt them. It's very, very, it's very precious. Our ethics are very, very, very precious. So now I do want to talk, wow, this is going to be really short. I'm going to talk about the fourth Pāramī, wisdom. And I want to start with a sutta that doesn't often get quoted, but I think it's very significant. And I first heard of it from Ajahn Thanissaro. It's in the Anguttara 6s, and it's Sutta 63. And the Buddha is going through aspects of our human life that we typically don't understand. And he gets to suffering. And the Buddha says, what happens? What is the result of suffering? And he's talking about us before we've come in contact with a spiritual practice and before we've come in contact with a spiritual path. He says what happens for us is our response is either and this is, all of humankind, we're either like overwhelmed, perplexed, confused. We just don't get it. We don't understand. Or number 2, we go on a search. But the search is outside of ourselves. We're looking for someone. We're looking for something. We're looking for some magic bullet that will take the pain away. This is what we do. This is our predicament. And you can see it very strongly in the culture, the perplexed, confused, non-understanding, people are like, well, why did this happen? I mean, why me? And I can't believe this is happening. We don't understand. And then the second response, this search outside of ourselves, this is all of the superhero stuff that our children get addicted to, right at a very young age, because this is very simplistic, and it's offering this thing, all these rescue stories, all the ideas of meeting that soulmate, the Prince Charming, and come and get me out of the castle, especially for women. And then men have this burden of, somehow rescuing, and we get into these relationships or we're trying to get rescued. All of our ridiculous obsession with celebrities, give me a break, that they can act, but they don't have wisdom, they can't. And we have all these talk shows, and it's just all these magazines, like we're really obsessed with this idea of save me, fix it, do something. So this is a very, very strong impetus in the human mind. And then we could have a third response to our suffering. And that is where wisdom comes in. That we start on a spiritual search. We start on a spiritual path. And this is what the Buddha did. And he's our pioneer. And he blazed the trail. And then we're just following the path with his instructions. And this is wisdom. And So, wisdom is very clearly defined in the teachings as right view. And right view is the beginning of the path. It's the first of the Eightfold Path. Because until you get onto this noble search, until you realize that the confusion and the perplexity, the overwhelm is not going anywhere, and this idea of getting saved somehow is not going anywhere, you begin the noble search. And usually it's because of suffering. And the noble search is what gets us onto the path, this idea of right view. And it begins with mundane right view. And then it develops to supra-mundane right view, which is the liberating right view. So the culmination of the path is that we fully penetrate the Four Noble Truths. And the first noble truth is to understand suffering. And the second noble truth is to eventually, bit by bit, and then bang, a big one, abandon these cravings that we have that are causing all these problems in our lives and based in delusion and ignorance and false promises, things that don't work. And the third noble truth is that this release from suffering is possible. It can be realized. And the fourth noble truth is you roll up your sleeves and you start walking down that path, brick by brick. Wisdom is making a path towards freedom that's out of our suffering, and it's built on our suffering. Suffering is not something to have just, tons and tons of aversion to. It's not something to get confused by. Nothing's wrong. Of course we're suffering. That's the whole point. The point is to unpack it, to understand it, and to disentangle ourselves, become unentangled. And this is possible. This is wisdom in the Buddha's teaching. Mundane right view. It's completely outlined. There's this very important sutta. Well, sorry, every sutta is very important. Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length sayings, Majjhima Nikaya 43. There's this important discussion that Sariputta has with a student of his, a monk, Mahakotita. And Mahakotita is just asking, sequence, question after question after question to Sariputta, and asks, one who is wise is said, friend, with reference to what is this said, one who is wise? And Sariputta answers, one wisely understands, friend. That is why it is said, one who is wise. What does one wisely understand? One wisely understands this is suffering. One wisely understands this is the origin of suffering. One wisely understands this is the cessation of suffering. One wisely understands this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. One wisely understands, friend. That is why it is said, one who is wise. And that's the culmination of right view. And right view begins with mundane right view that gets us, bumps us out of these two responses that we have to suffering, being perplexed or looking for, rescue. And we begin our spiritual path. And we begin it with realizing those two things aren't working. That's wisdom right there. It's enough wisdom to get you started. And this is mundane right view. This is the beginning of the path. There is what's given and what is offered and what is sacrificed. There's fruit and result of good and bad actions. And we start to realize that what I do makes a big difference. What I think makes a big difference. There's this world and the other world. There's mother and father. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously. There are in the world good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. This is right view. This is mundane right view. And this is from Majjhima Nikaya 117. It's verse 7. It's many times the Buddha outlines mundane right view. And something that's really important in that is, it's this idea of karma. It's this idea of cause and effect, that what I do makes a big difference. And like in the spiritual arena, it might not make this huge difference in this life. It's not, it's a much, much bigger picture, so you just trust that living an ethical life is very important for my mind, my heart, for my own moral development, even if it's not, getting you promoted or, it's not this cause and effect. Oh, I do something good and then, immediately it's going to work. And it's not like that. It's a much, much bigger picture. And the other aspect of mundane right view that's super important is there are in the world good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. That the first recluse that's done that is the Buddha. So and he's asking us to put faith that he actually fully saw, fully penetrated, fully understood how things work, reality, and this moral law of karma, this moral law of cause and effect. And so it's very important that we really trust the Buddha, and then to find other beings that we feel like we can put trust in, like for me, Thich Nhat Hanh, for me, and we find them. Ajahn Brahm, now Beth Upton, which is really helpful for me because I can actually have access to that being. And even if people are ahead of us on the path, and we realize, oh, they've got wisdom and they've taken some steps, and I can follow behind them. This is also very, very useful. Such a big component of wisdom is getting ourselves surrounded by wisdom teachings and wise people, wise fellow travelers. In fact, going back to the conversation between Mahakotthita and Sariputta, I'm probably going to share this verse so many times because I think it's very important. Back in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta 43, Mahakotthita asks Sariputta, friend, how many conditions are there for the arising of right view? What are the precursors? What are the prerequisites? What do I do to start, wisdom arising in my own mind? And Sariputta answers, friend, there are two conditions for the arising of right view. The voice of another and wise attention. These are the two conditions for the arising of right view. So that voice of another, we've all experienced that in our lives. We've all experienced right view arising because of the voice of another. Somebody wrote something, somebody said something in a conversation, and a penny dropped, something clicked for us, and we had a perspective on a situation that eased our suffering. This is the voice of another. And eventually it will be the voice of another person who's got supra mundane right view. They've really penetrated the Four Noble Truths. For me, those people are the Thich Nhat Hanh, Ajahn Brahm. And it's going to be different for different people. The voice of another. And we live in a very fortunate time spiritually, in that we have access to a lot of wisdom teachings, a lot, because of the globalization that we live in and the technology. It used to be, you'd have to walk, we know these stories, walk up big mountains in the Himalayas to find the teacher in the cave. And it's not like that now. We just little old us can have access to this voice of another that can literally change our lives. And the second condition, wise attention. And that's where the wisdom becomes much more practice. It's the wise attention. We'll talk about it all the time. There's so many different ways to talk about wise attention. But this is where the wisdom teachings that we get from the voice of another, and from the suttas, and from chanting, and from the Buddha's teachings, and from our own Dhamma-centered conversations, become practice, things that we can do. That's the wise attention. This is where we can start to untangle beliefs that we have, habits that we have, that are hurting us, that are not, they're leading to more anger, they're leading to more feeling like a victim. They're reinforcing, painful patterns that were laid down in our childhood. This is where the wise attention, learning to look at things from a different perspective, learning when and how to start to care for our own minds. This is the wise attention piece. And this is where the Four Noble Truths can start to be a framework, so we can start to bring wise attention. The first Noble Truth, this is suffering. We can practice this. I'm not talking about, penetrating the Four Noble Truths and becoming enlightened. I'm talking about minute by minute, hour by hour, using the framework of the Four Noble Truths to work with our own mind. So this is suffering. This is the doorway. This is the gate. Big picture, it's the gate that gets us on the path. Little picture, it's the window, it's the doorway that gets us to take this suffering brick, and sort of try and dislodge it from this mind body, and lay it down, in front of me on the path, and step on it and go to the next one. An example, like, this is suffering, that is the doorway, and we can feel that in our bodies. And you can feel that. You can feel anger. You can feel aversion. You can feel jealousy. You can feel these afflictive mind states. You can feel contortions and martyr is, whatever, however you're wired, you can start to feel in your body. I'll give you an example. I moved here, a month ago, and I was telling Sanghamita yesterday, it's a very interesting experience for me as a monastic. I've been a monastic over 10 years, but I've never really experienced this dependency of being dependent on alms, being actually dependent on directly on lay people's donations. I mean, it gets talked about all the time. We had a little poster in different monasteries that I've lived in, but I was always not, right face to face with it. Always was, in a monastery where people gave donations to the monastery that was very established. It was an organization. And then I just went into the storeroom and got a tube of toothpaste, or I just, went with a steward to the store and got a new pair of shoes. But I didn't have to go, oh, can I have some toothpaste, to face with a lay person. So it's brought up this dependency, which I think is what the Buddha intended of, there's ways I feel disempowered, and there's ways I feel back in childhood, that I'm dependent. And so it's sort of the pump has been primed, and then like Sangamita will make comments like on Monday, and she's like, oh, Ayya Ahimsa, could you do me a favor? We've been having issues with, I've had issues before with fruit flies, and when you do the dishes and there's food left in the drain, right? And I went to this place, honestly, I was about 6 years old, and like, I'm bad, I did it wrong. And it was like, whoa. And so this is the clue, I'm just telling you how I practice with it. This is suffering. Is the door open? And so before, someone untrained, sorry, I'm not sounding like I'm trained. I'm sorry. I'm just saying, before in my life, before I knew what to do, I would collapse into that place of, I am bad. That's a very strong voice. And it's very, very strong from childhood. And so it was like, and then after I'm bad, of course, who wants to feel that? Then I get mad, I get angry, and I feel like it's not fair. You actually tied up the compost, and I was the one going to take, it was like, whoa. So the key is, I'm overreacting. Like, that's the key. She's just asking me to, yeah, of course, the drain needs to be emptied, but no, I've got this thing going on inside. So, and we have these because of unskillful and harmful lives that we've lived, for whatever reason. So it was just very, very rich for me to understand what is going on. And that's the first noble truth: understand suffering. And it was a very wonderful experience for me, because I felt all those things, and then I was able to pop out of, I'm not a child, I'm not bad, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, more like, that's a very, very strong pattern, and it gets triggered now in this dynamic, and it's just very rich for me to work with, and it's a gift, because these patterns must be unwoven and untangled, because they're there, and so much of what we're talking about is, both in Tuesday night and on Friday morning, is these thoughts are, they're thoughts. They're not reality. I want to read. I told someone, no, we won't read out of the book, but I'm the one doing it. To me, Ajahn Sucitto illustrates this so beautifully, and I'm going to read 2 paragraphs, but he's also sort of fleshing out, how do we do this, like, hour by hour. So what I'm reading on page 85, and I'm going to go to the top of page 86, And it's beautiful. It's a section that he's entitled Realization, the Flowering of Wisdom. And I just wanted to be talking about wisdom, practicing it, wise attention. What we see with insight is that all our aversion, our greed, or our worry cluster around perceptions or impressions that we have. They're not innate, they're not self. For instance, when you dislike a person, the person in your mind, this is so important, what he says, the person in your mind is actually an accumulation of various impressions that irritate you. It's not actually the person. It's like the particular signs that you've focused on and have all been constructed, sankhara, built up in your mind. The perceptions that do otherwise are screened out. They don't get to be there. You don't remember the person's suffering, virtue, or nobility. You remember their tardiness, greediness, or lack of cooperation. In this way, you build up an identity picture of a person based on a few perceptions. But if you step out of that through calming the mind, you can investigate and acknowledge the things you weren't noticing. And then it's clear that this isn't a person, this is an impression of them that I've created out of aversion. And as you look into that, you learn that your own mind can't tolerate, you learn what your own mind can't tolerate. And as long as that remains the case, you're allowing that picture to have power over you. You inquire, how has my mind gathered together this particular image? Then you begin to understand that such perceptions are selective impressions based on pain, your own pain, and on not being in touch with or being able to handle that wave of pain. So it gets stuck within us and can't pass. We're sensitive beings and don't like irritating things. But if we're not wise enough to acknowledge and let go, if we ignorantly shield ourselves from that irritation, these irritants get embedded into anxiety and aversion. You only get past them by looking into them, into how they're caused, and letting them pass through you. It's great stuff, So I am going to end there. I mean, we could just talk. Wisdom is the path, honestly. I mean, all of the paramis. Yeah. Wisdom is so important. It's the beginning and it is the end of the path. And it's the whole way through. Our wisdom faculty will just get stronger, get more versatile, get broader, get deeper, and get more quick to operate, and more benefit. And all of this for ourselves. And then, a wise person is the greatest gift to the world. We need wisdom. All of our every being. Yeah. So I'll end there, and maybe just a couple minutes for discussion, and then we'll have a closing of mudita. So just to plant that, you can go around. We're going to go around, and I'll share what so that we can have mudita for you. So you're sharing something that is wonderful, uplift. It can be very small. I had small, big, a tree. It was beautiful. Anything. But first, we just open it up for a couple minutes. If someone wants to share. And can you pass that mic to Marilyn? Thanks. Yeah.
Well, you just opened a very tightly closed door. I think I mentioned I'm a twin, and we're like night and day, although we're identical. So I was always compared to my sister because she was, in my mother's vision, the perfect little girl. She loved dressing up, and she loved having tea parties. And I was just like, oh my God, I would run down the lane and play with boys and climb trees and all kinds of stuff. And then one day I was walking home from school. We used to walk up the back lane, and a neighbor was in the backyard, and he yelled. We just you know, we knew everybody. And he said, oh, he said, which twin are you, the good one or the bad one? And I was so stunned. I could barely walk and go home. And so sometimes I like to talk with people. But anyway, so that set me off in a life of crime. I mean, that's a hyperbole, but it just kept me going further and further that way. Trying to find some kind of freedom, you know, trying to define that don't have expectations. I'm not trying to live a bad life, you know. When I was young, I was in elementary school when that happened. And that just, I could just see my whole trajectory of my life when you were talking about that. I thought, oh my God. So, so I think I started to understand what you're talking about.
Oh, Marilyn, I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for sharing. Let's definitely talk. Let's stop there then. Yeah, let's just be with that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's what we're all doing here, you know, that we don't cause harm like that. There's so much ignorance. Yeah, the Buddha says a mass of ignorance. Kind of like granite, you know, we're trying to drill through and penetrate, and every little chip is important and a benefit. Yeah, I don't know if you, like, I think all of our little kids inside are just like, from what you just shared, mine is. So, yeah, we're really going to change gear and just go around and share something that is well and bringing uplift and encouragement in our individual lives, and then we'll have a chance to hold that collectively, rejoice in it, mudita. You know, it's the quickest way to actually to change. You know, to bump out of suffering, because there's always things that are going well for other people, and if we get out of our small selves and can really rejoice for other people and understand that everything ebbs and flows. Nothing is permanent. So their good fortune will eventually, something good will happen in our own lives. Meanwhile, rejoice for others. Yeah. So would anyone like to start? They have something right away? Okay, Sangamita, and then Catherine, and then Sharon. Yeah, well, great. Please.
So I had a chance to speak with my very good Kalyanamita Bodhipala after our Pasika meeting last night, and it was so inspiring talking to her, because she's been working very, 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 very hard as a steward at Birkenforth Monastery. And she's planned these 2 months silent retreat before she arrives here on April 1st to share the steward position with me here. And so feeling so happy for her that she's going to have these 2 months. And then life happened, or the famous Zen saying, shit happens. Her father, who has a lung condition and is elderly, got COVID, and so he's very, very sick and in hospital. And so she's going and she's from Nova Scotia, so she's off to Nova Scotia. So goodbye, or it looked like goodbye to this wonderful 2-month break of silent meditation. But what was so inspiring was she said, I'm going to make this a good experience. So instead of saying, oh, life circumstances are crushing me, she said, she's taking responsibility. I'm going to make this a good experience. So instead of staying with family, she's rented a place so that she'll be alone. So it's a little cabin in the woods. And anyway, she's just going to make the best of it. And that was just so inspiring.
Very inspiring. Yay. Catherine.
This isn't the main thing. Well, it's the main. I'm just really happy to finally be here on a
Can
Friday.
you touch your chin?
It's my first Friday, but I want to share it. Yesterday, I got this big box. Well, small box, but heavy in the mail. And John's like, something has come for you in the mail. He goes, it's pretty heavy. And so I thought it was the 2 books that I ordered for but it was actually the numerical discourses of the Buddha. But I didn't show him when I opened it. And so then in the evening, we decided we were just gonna read for a couple hours, and I'm sitting at the dining room table, and he just comes to take a break and say hello, and he looks down at the book. And he's like, what are you reading? And he goes, that looks like terror. He talked about how it reminded him of a English course that he took in Old English that had to have commentaries that it was so hard to, and that was the worst course I ever took at university. And he's like, I love your mind. He was, and this is an endearing term for us. He goes, I love your geeky mind. And what it's done for me is I've done tons and tons of reading of yoga philosophy books, like again, other books that people wouldn't necessarily be interested in.
Right.
And this is very similar. It's written very similar. And he kind of looked at some of the sutras. He's like, what is this? And they're all the same words over. I'm like, you just learn how to read it, and you just. And so I just felt my geeky self again, and just really enjoying. I got to page 120 yesterday.
Whoa.
Yeah,
a
we
lot.
read for 2 or 3 hours. Anyway.
Great. And so, Leslie, I'm just going to go to Sharon, and then we'll go to you. Wonderful. And I just go like this, I guess. Oh, sorry. I did. Oh,
You want to pin
I
her?
did it wrong. But I'm not bad. Okay. See, pin. Great. Thank you. Great. Please, Sharon.
Okay, I was just gonna say, we've never had a dog before, and it's pretty mundane, but it's just such joy to get up in the morning, and nobody has ever been as happy to see me as my dog. Quack, 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 quack. And the reason I'm kind of restless here is because someone left the basement door open, and my dog has joined me. He's still a puppy, so anyway.
Beautiful. What's the puppy's name?
Darwin.
Darwin.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Oh, fantastic. Great. Okay.
Yeah, I found a spot in the basement here in my husband's sort of rigged up office. So we've got the furnace, and then we've got the dog. So I'm doing my best. It's kind of hard to hear. But thank you
Excellent.
very much. It's so nice to meet you.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for coming. Wonderful. And
We go up here to remove pin.
oh, Leslie. Great. Leslie.
Well, this is a fairly recent happiness, as since my husband died, I have had the question, what's the whole point of life? I mean, that is the question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
As I was meditating today, it came to me, the point is to be happy. And then you talk about how the precepts lead to happiness, and everything you were saying today points to happiness. And I'm happy. Thank you.
Wow, that's not. Yeah, great, sure.
I guess the first thing that jumped into my mind is what I'll share, which is just the joy of being in winter. That I grew up in North Dakota, and it's been like decades since I've really spent time in just with not visiting winter, but just living in it. And the one moment when I most felt it, like all the way in my bones, was just I've been out walking, exploring the trail system, and happened by an outdoor skating rink. And like there's just something about ice skates outdoors that was just like that is the essence of like the joy of being active, playing outside.
We'll give it to Marilyn, and then we'll go online, and then Ryan. Great.
Yeah, kind of open the floodgate. Is really
Yeah.
trying to fight for things. I guess I'm appreciative of what people are saying and what's bringing them joy. I'm being taken into Calgary for another doctor's appointment, so I'll just be able to sit in the car and tell my driver to just let me be and kind of sort of just when you start sorting out, because these lots are all letting out.
Great. Thanks, Marilyn. Oh, sure. Let's do Ryan. Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Ryan.
I guess what was it yesterday? I had to do an hour and a half of French tests for work. So don't feel happy about that, but just feel happy that it's done.
It's over.
It's done. I'm very happy that it's done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was surprised how much I knew, but
So much mudita, but that's done. So much mudita comes up. How about Kusala and then Sarah? Does that work? Let's do Kusala and then Sarah.
Thank you for your Dhamma talk today. It really hit home in a lot of ways. Yeah, I'm definitely replaying it. I'm just really joyous to be here, enjoying the sun in Mexico and just being truly in the moment. No agenda, nowhere to be other than Zoom meetings, but just going with the flow and not beating myself up for not getting things done because there's nothing to get done. It's just it's really freeing. It's coming from a different place. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry that we're okay. And let's Sarah.
Well, I'm sitting looking out into my backyard, and it's just like a festival of birds out there. But this week, the blue jays finally found my yard again. They hadn't been anywhere, and now they're back and trying to fit in between all the magpies seem to be the bosses of the yard, but the other guys are getting some turns at the feeders, and it's just glorious to watch.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'll share that I was in the bigger kuti, the one that's part of the garage, and then Anagarika Bethany was coming, and so I was, sort of preparing the smaller kuti, and then I'm like, ooh, anyway, I moved to the smaller kuti, and I've landed. Like I can't believe the difference. It's like a womb with a view. I just feel so. I love it in there. Yeah. So, I'm like, I feel like just, yeah, it's a very special space for me. So, yeah. Great.
So may the merit of our practice be shared with all sentient beings, named and unnamed.
Ruth.
Agnes, Blair,
Scott.
may all beings be well and happy. Thank you, everyone. So no meeting next week. We'll be in retreat. So we'll see you in 2 weeks unless you're part of the retreat.
Or come to any of the Moon Day tomorrow.
Yes.
Wonderful. You have a fantastic time of practice. Mudita for all of us on the path.